Let's look at how Android supports graphics. Now, similarly, if you're doing something with iOS, you would have a similar way of doing things in iOS also. iOS, for example, for 3D graphics, iOS also supports making use of OpenGL, OpenGL ES, OpenGL Embedded Systems version. That is common. Both iOS as well as Android support OpenGL ES 2.0 at this level. Okay, so the Android platform supports 2D graphics, which is powered by a custom library within Android, which we'll talk a little bit about here. High performance 3D graphics is actually based upon OpenGL. This is ES 2.0. They have enhanced the support, so the new version support ES 2.0. So you can make use of OpenGL ES 2.0. Now, within your application, which kind of graphics would you like to use? It depends upon what is it that you're trying to achieve using graphics in your application. If you're doing simple animation with static applications, you can achieve much of it by doing very simple things with graphics, as I will show you examples of. If you need for interactive games and 3D rendering and so on, that gets very complicated. And then, of course, obviously, you have to resort to using OpenGL and so on. But okay, let's first deal with 2D graphics, which is the easier one of the two. And we'll see how 2D graphics can be done. Together with this, we'll also talk about animation, doing different kinds of animations in the application. Even if you're not doing a graphics-intensive application, like a game and so on, you may still want to use some simple graphics within your application in order to make your user interface a bit more fun, a bit more attractive to make use of. Things like, for example, flying buttons, and then sliding things onto the screen from somewhere, things that attract people. Something like making use of PowerPoint. In PowerPoint, you do use a little bit of animation, right? Which makes slides a bit more interesting. Similarly, even in Android, if you want to make a particular screen a bit interesting, you can make use of a little bit of these features that we will talk about to make it more attractive to users. Now, simple things can be done directly for 2D graphics. You can approach it using something called the view object. You all have seen the use of view objects, right, within Android, things like text view, image view, and other things. You can directly manipulate certain features and properties of those view objects in order to create things, as I will show you with some examples. You can do animations, things like view animation and property animation, which also I will show you some examples to illustrate what I mean by this. If you want to do more detailed things, like being able to draw your own things on the screen, then you make use of a canvas. The canvas allows you to draw things on the screen and then present it on the screen. Canvas can be done in one of two types. You can do canvas directly on the view, or you can use a canvas which you update in the background and then refresh the screen after an update is completed, which we call as a surface view way of doing things, which I will talk about in more detail. First, simple 2D graphics kind of things with something called Drawables. What are Drawables? Drawables can be used for doing things like drawing shapes and images to a view, like a text view. Like you want to embellish the text that you display on the screen, maybe change the background on which the text is being displayed, perhaps add a little bit of shadow to text, and things like that. Like a background gradation to the screen. Those things can easily be done by using Drawables. You can go a bit more complex even with that. For this, the base class is called as the Drawable class. That's the base Java class that we use for doing these things. But this class is subclassed into different kinds, which you can make use of for doing different things. I will explain each one of them and then show you examples of some of them in practice. You have things like bitmap drawable, which can be used to display bitmaps. Shape drawable, which you can use to draw shapes on the screen within a particular view. Picture drawables, and then layered drawables. You can overlay things on the screen to create a nice effect, and so on. These drawables, any one of these kinds, can be defined and instantiated within your application in 3 ways. First, you can directly use the image that you save in your project resources. We have seen the use of images in creating the user interface, like the examples that you have seen in the lab, where you use some logos on the screen to display things. That is a very straightforward way of doing things. If you want to be a bit more complicated, you can use an XML file to define certain properties of a drawable and then manipulate them in order to do some things on the screen. You can even directly use code to manipulate things that you display, different views that are part of your user interface. By using code, it gives you the most flexibility, and so on. The drawable resources that you make use of are stored in this particular directory called res/drawable. You have all seen res/drawable previously, right? That is where you store all the images that you make use of within your application. Even within this, you have things like HDPI, XDPI, LDPI, and other things in the drawable file. So what are drawables? There are several different varieties of drawables, each allowing you to do several different things. I will show you examples of some of them. Bitmap drawables are the simplest ones. These are the ones that you can use to display an image on the screen. You can even do tiling of the image on the screen and so on. So if you want to construct a nice background that you use within your application, like for example, if you have a game that you implement, but you want a nice background design to be created for the game play, you can make use of bitmap drawable to draw things there. 9-patch is a way of creating the PNG or the graphics in such a way that it can be stretched to fill the screen. You have a certain specific way of drawing this PNG or PNG file that specifies which areas of the PNG file can be stretched easily in order to automatically adapt to the size of the screen. This is a bit complicated, a bit more complicated than using simple bitmap. If you use a simple bitmap, if you use for different screens, the bitmap will simply be stretched. The whole bitmap will be stretched. Instead, if you want certain part of the bitmap to be fixed, but remaining parts that can be stretched to fill the space, then you can use 9-patch. I'll not go into examples of 9-patch. If you need things like, for example, creating specialized buttons and so on can be done using 9-patch. I'll show you examples of shape drawable. Things like you can draw simple shapes on the screen. Like, for example, if you want to display some text and you want to surround the text with a circle or an oval or things like that, you can easily do that and add some color to the background. Shape drawables are very useful. Layered drawables allows you to take multiple drawables and then position them on the screen, one on top of the other, overlaying one on top of the other. If you want to create a nice effect for designing your screen, layered drawables are very useful. State drawables allow you to include a little bit of animated effect within your application. Like, for example, if you touch the item on the screen, its color may change. When you remove your finger from touching, the color may change back to its original. Those kind of things can easily be done using state drawables. I'll show you an example of that. Different level drawables based on the level, and then scale drawables, which is modified depending upon different levels and so on. So I'll show you examples of some of these in practice in the specific example that we have been considering so far in the lab. Okay? Now, detailed information about these, about how to make use of each one of them, can be found again on the Android developers website, developer.android.com. Look for it under graphics. It will show you all the different features, including drawables. Bitmap drawables we have already seen before. The use of image view and so on that you have seen in the previous case. You can also use XML to include bitmaps with modifications to the layouts, things like cropping the bitmap and so on. Something like this. This allows you to tile a bitmap onto the screen. You can express it by using simple here. What you're doing is you're specifying the basic bitmap, and then you're specifying how to repeat in tiled mode on the screen, and so on. So that's one way you can construct a bit more complicated ones using simple bitmaps. Shape drawables. These are very useful for defining properties for some standard shapes, for example, to be included in the view background. For example, if you want to shade the background of some buttons or the background of some text view that you're displaying on the screen, you can make use of shape drawables in order to do things. Let's look at an example of using shape drawables. This is for doing a gradient view on the screen. Let me show an example here. This one, number 6, version number 6, you have seen already in the previous lab. We're going to take that and modify it, and then you'll produce a version 7 of that. Now here, what we will do is we'll do different kinds of things on the screen. We'll do different animations. We'll do, in drawables, we'll do different kinds of things on the screen. So let me bring up a layout on the screen and then show you how we can do different kinds of things on the screen in order to show what kind of effect they will have on the screen. And then we'll see the example itself running. Let me see. Okay, this is the back grid. Okay, now this is your welcome. I will increase the size so that. Okay, can you see it more clearly now? Now, I don't know whether the screen is showing it as truthfully as it should, but you would notice that within this particular example, if you look at the welcome.xml, the XML version of it, you would notice that in this linear layout, this linear layout represents the layout of the screen here. Okay, we can change some things in the linear layout. As you see, in this particular case, for this linear layout, I have declared this background as drawable back gradient. If I remove that, then you would see the corresponding graphical layout. Can you notice that the screen is single solid color here? You can you see the difference? The screen is single solid blue color here. Okay. Now, if I include that particular back gradient, and you would notice that the screen now becomes a little bit I don't know if you can see it, but there is a small amount of color change as you go down the screen, right? This is one way that you can do things on the screen. Now, if you don't like this, you can. Now, what exactly is this back gradient thing? This is nothing but a shape drawable, as you can see from this. In the shape drawable, I have declared the gradient of it. I said the shape is a rectangle because I am manipulating it as a rectangle, and then I define the gradient color here. If I want to be a little bit funny with it, I can change that to circle, and then I go back to the welcome screen, and it should actually change that into a circle. It's supposed to change that into a circle. Oh, sorry, not circle, oval. I think that's what it is. Well, of course, obviously, this looks ridiculous on screen, but I just wanted to show you that you can do things like that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what it will not change when you input the circle?
No, circle is not a defined thing. It's called an oval. There is no such thing as a circle. It's called an oval. It's called an oval. Okay. Yeah, I thought circle should work, but circle doesn't seem to work. It's called an oval. So you can do an oval here. You can change things like, for example, here I have changed from 003366, and then I can do things like this would be definitely noticeable.
You haven't saved.
Sorry, I have to save it. See, if you want to see, of course, this is again still just as ridiculous, but if you want to create some nice effects on the screen, you don't really need to do anything fancy. You can do simple things like that, and then create nice fancy features. That's the thing that I wanted to illustrate by using the shape drawable. And let me revert back. The features so that we are back to our original shape, and then you can see the gradation there on the screen. Okay. Now I can go back to the gradient and then now change this a little bit, and then you will be able to see a slight effect there. Not as much, but again, play around with it until you get something that is nice to look at on the screen, not jarring like this. But yeah, that's the intention. It's very straightforward. As you can see, using a shape drawable, you declare what the shape is going to assume, and then use that shape as a background for that other particular example. You can use the same thing to construct like a button background. So if you don't want the boring gray buttons that you use in your application, you can change the buttons to have some nice color like this, and then make it a bit more attractive for people to use things. So as you see, doing this fancy things on the screen is not that difficult. That's the intention of showing how you can make use of these drawables. Okay, shape drawables. So again, and then by adjusting this angle, for example, you can allow the color to go like this, like left, right, and things like that. You can play around with this angle. It tells you how the gradient is displayed on the screen. So I can change that from, say, 270 to, let's see, just simply 0. And then we can see the effect this from left to right, and I could do 180. Right to left. So obviously now you understand why I use 270. 270 is coming down. 0. Sorry. Let's try all the possibilities. 90. The other way around. So 0, 90, 180, 270, and so on.
Can you change the source? For example, radial.
So, sorry.
There are gradients where you can do where it starts from the middle and it radial.
Oh, radiates out.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there is something called pivot or something like that for the gradient, which will specify from where to start and where to end. I believe that there is something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but because I didn't do that, so. But yes, there must be a way of doing that also. Where you can create nice effects like that. Okay, let's see. Now, this particular one was something that looked reasonably clean on the screen, so that's why I stuck to that variant. So, that is shape drawables for you. So when you design user interfaces, make use of these to make the UIs a bit more interesting. Okay. Now, within an application, for example, you can set the background to be that. So if you define this in a file called backgradient, as you saw in the example, then you can just simply include that. So you can declare these XML files in the drawables and then make use of these XML files for different objects in there. State list drawables. You can use this to represent several different images for the same graphic depending on the state of the object. Like, for example, if you have a text view and then you want the text view to change its certain property of it in order to reflect different features. Like, for example, if you select a button, you want to indicate to the user that the user has selected a button. You can change the background color of the button, and then when the user removes the finger, you can change the color back to its normal case. Similarly, you can change the background color of the text, and then back. You could even do something as like if your button is here, and then if the user touches the button, you can displace the button a little bit to the right to indicate to the user that the user has selected it. This you need to play around until you get something that you like. Okay. In this particular example, what I do is I look at making an item. For example, this is a selector. This is how you define the XML file that tells you the different ways that this thing can be displayed. So if you say an item, if the state pressed is true, then you make use of this particular drawable. If the state is selected is true, then you make use of that. Otherwise, you simply maintain it by default as backgradient. Where is this used in practice? Now, this can be used, for example, to indicate in situations where you are having a menu item and you want to indicate that you have selected a particular item from a list menu. You can make use of this in practice. Let me show you the usage of this in an example. Coming back to this particular one. Let me start this particular example. sometimes. Okay. Okay, the emulator is launched. I'll simply show you how we make use of the stateless drawables in an example. This is back gradient you have already seen here. Now here you see, for example, highlight. What exactly is highlight? In case of highlight, I am simply making use of the same shape drawable, but instead I am setting the background color to be a bright orange color. So if I touch the item, the color will change to bright orange color in practice. And then I use these two in this particular XML file called as a selector. So as you see in the selector, if the state pressed is true, I will use this highlighted. If the state selected is true, I will use it highlighted. If it is focused, I will also use highlighted. Otherwise, I will simply use the default color. So depending upon what I am doing to that item, if I am touching that item, I will have a different color for it. If I am focusing on that item, I'll have a different color to it. Focusing with a hardware keyboard, hardware keys. If I am touching it with my finger, then I can highlight with color. If I am not, then I simply maintain it as it is. Now, this, where am I making use of it? I am making use of it in the menu file that you have seen before. Okay? So in this particular case, if you go into this menu, you have seen this menu item, right? This is the list view that you have seen before. So in the list view, I am using the list view menu item. So if I go to the list view menu item, which is the list item here, you would notice that okay, for this one, if I go to the XML file, what am I doing here? In here, I am setting my background to be this file called menu selector. Okay? What this does is it changes all the items in my list view, all the items using this menu selector. Which means that if I touch an item on the screen, its color will change from blue to orange. If I remove my finger, it will change from orange back to blue. Okay? So that way it reflects that I am selecting something on the screen. Let me show you that in practice. So getting back to this particular example, so as you see, suppose I want to be able to indicate that we have seen this part already in the previous this is basically loading the XML file from the server. You have seen the XML parser in the previous version of this. It is tough. Okay. I'll show you how to do that also. I'm sure. Okay. Now, in this particular case, like for example, if I select an item, notice that I am pressing it down. I'm basically using my finger to well, in this case, I'm simulating it by pressing my finger on the touchpad here. You notice that the color has changed to a different color. The reason for it is to indicate to the user that the user is actually touching that particular item. So you have selected that item. So that's why in the touch pressed, this is the highlighted. So the background color was changed to orange in that particular case. If I leave my finger, okay, obviously that item gets activated, and then you'll, oh, now I understand what happened. I don't have internet access here. That's why it is taking forever for the application to work. In my application, I don't check to see whether I have internet access or not, which is an improper thing to do. Within your application, if you need internet access, you need to check and make sure that you have internet access before you allow the application. I'll tell you later on in the network selection area what's the specific check that you should do in order to ensure that you have internet access. Now it should work fine. Or at least it should work fine. Well, just as you expect, when I'm trying to demonstrate something, it won't work. Okay, but that's the second part. So what I am doing here is I am making use of this list item. I am making use of this menu selector. So you notice that if the item is pressed, selected, or focused, I am changing the background color to this highlighter. And the highlighted, as I showed you in the other XML file, indicates that the color would be orange. Right? This is highlighted. So as you see, in this particular case, the color is orange, right? So that's the way I am simulating the effect. And if it is not the default value is back gradient. You already saw back gradient, which I have described earlier. So the default value, if I'm not selecting it, then it will be simply displaying as the back gradient, which is basically what you see in this particular picture here. I should have clicked that thing, and for some reason this thing is left with no internet access. Let me cancel it. Okay, so that is the state list drawable that I showed you on this.
Oh, Professor.
Yeah.
Can you declare several different variables within the same XML file?
Several different variables in the same.
Because here you declared back gradient in one XML file and then highlighted in another XML file.
Yes. So your question is, can I do back gradient, highlighters, and all the things in the same one?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it won't work. Because each of them is a different one. Right? Each of them is a different drawable. Each of them is a different shape drawable. So every one such shape drawable that you want to create, you need to create a separate XML. Because you are declaring the, as you saw in this particular example here, as you saw in this particular example, let's see, in this example, you have declared this shape, right? And then you have set the properties of that shape. The solid color, orange.
So you can't declare another shape?
No, you can't declare two shapes. Because then the Android framework will be confused. Which shape am I supposed to use? Right? So that's why you have to specify each shape separately. So this is one shape where the background color is orange in color. Another shape that we used was the backgradient shape, which in which case you declared a different shape, and this shape is a rectangle with this kind of gradient.
So when you call the shape, it will be the name of the XML file.
Name of the XML file that you are making. So inside there, you are declaring the specific shape. So back gradient is one shape, highlighted is another shape. Okay? And then you can make use of that. So each shape drawable has to be in a separate file. And all of these have to be stored in this directory called Drawable. Okay? Now, these things, you don't have HDPI, LDPI, and MDPI because these are all XML. So they will automatically scale. So you don't need separate versions for different density screens. You can declare them in one place and then make use. So if you have something that you can commonly use for all, then you put it in this drawable folder. Okay? And then you can make use of them in creating. So now you see how you can create nice things, nice graphics on the screen. So this is not necessarily for doing any graphics on the screen, but this is basically something that allows you to create a nice user interface. You may want to create a nice background and so on. Pleasing user interface to the user's eyes. Okay? You can make use of any of these features. And these are static things. You are not making any changes to them. So the drawables are basically things that allow you to statically control how graphical changes can be done on the screen. Of course, you can say, oh, I can do that. I simply take a PNG file and then draw a gradient of the PNG file using Adobe Photoshop and then make use of it in my code. Yes, of course, you can do that. But this is a lot more simpler, right? That's the intention for me showing you. You don't really need to create separate PNG files with different colors and so on. You can simply use code. You don't even have to declare things in XML. You can directly write the corresponding code. The XML, if you write it, then it will be inflated by the Android framework. There is a way of inflating it inside the code, right? If you directly do it in code, you can directly control changing the background color of any item in the code on the fly. So those things can be done too. You have to be creative in making use of all these features within your application to make it attractive. Okay? Any other questions? So far we have seen simple ways of doing things on the screen that allows you to create nice graphics on the screen and so on. Now, if you want a little bit of action on the screen, obviously simple graphics are wonderful, but if you want a little bit of action on the screen, things like, for example, when the user starts your application, you want things to be thrown onto the screen. You always see these, dynamic screens being generated. From when you move from one screen to another screen, probably you want to push things around and then redraw the screen and so on. Now, why do you need to do that? You don't really have to do it, but it makes it fun, right? So, the second possible way of creating things like that is by using animation. Now, in animation, as I will show you, there are 3 different ways of doing animation. And before I do that, I will show you what this particular example does in practice so that we can see what exactly we are doing with the animation for this particular example. If you start up this example, okay, let me restart the example. If you start that example, notice, of course, obviously, I did it just for the sake of effect. It's foolish to do it, right? But I did it just to overemphasize the use of animation. Obviously, there is no need to spin things like that and so on. You may just want to stretch things on the screen. You may just want to push something onto the screen. You have seen the use of these in PowerPoint. When I present simple, static PowerPoint slides, you get bored, right? Or if I throw in a little bit of animation onto my PowerPoint slides, you suddenly become excited to watch things on the screen. Obviously, in my slides, I don't use much of animation. I just simply put things on the screen and explain. But if you want to, it makes it a little bit fun. Okay. Furthermore, there are things that you can do with animation in practice. Now, how do we make use of this animation in practice? Animation in Android comes in 3 forms. Okay, 3 different kinds of animations. The newer version, that is from Android version 3.2 onwards, we have a new animation mechanism called as property animation, okay, which I will explain in a little bit more after I explain the second kind, which is called view animation. View animation was the earlier way of doing some animations on the screen, but then the Android people realized that with view animation some things don't work very well, and so they were trying to fix them, and then they came up with a more general way of doing animations, which they call as property animation. Drawable animation, you can do it with drawable resources by using things like a progression of bitmaps. So for example, if you want to create some animated things, you can have a sequence of bitmaps that you can display on the screen one after another consecutively, and that creates a little bit of animation on the screen. But that is a very slow way of creating animation. You have all seen animated GIF files, right? Being made use of in web pages and so on. You can do things like that. You can have a sequence of frames which are slightly different versions of the same PNG file, and then you can create a drawable class with all these supplied one after another, and then the sequence of files will be cycled through. So it creates a kind of dynamic motion on the screen. That can be done very easily. This is done by using drawable animation, but that's a very simple way of doing things. We'll look at view animation next, and then I'll come to property animation finally. And I'll show you similar effects being done both with view animation as well as the corresponding way of doing things with property animation. 2 different examples, and you will see both these examples also in the lab next week. So let's look at the view animation first. View animation allows you to create animation for any view object. Text view, image view, button, any of those things can be animated by making use of the view animation. Even within view animation, there are 2 kinds of animations. One called as tween animation, and the second one called frame-by-frame animation. In frame-by-frame animation, you're basically loading a series of drawable resources one after another to create an animation. This is a simple way of doing things. In tween animation, what you're doing is you are changing the property of that particular view as a function of time. Like, for example, you can change the visibility, what we call as the alpha of the view, from completely transparent to completely opaque. So what on the screen, what appears is like it suddenly, slowly comes up onto the screen. As you saw in this particular example, where did my example go? Okay, let me restart this example one more time, and then we'll see that example to show you how 3 different kinds of animations are used in this particular example. Okay, so let me explain tween animation first. Frame-by-frame animation is more straightforward. It's nothing but a sequence of drawables that you display on the screen. which is fairly straightforward. Now, if you want to see the use of animations then and different kinds of creating user interfaces, this particular example called API demos is the place to look for it. In all the Android SDKs that you install, you have sample applications that come with it. How many of you are aware that there are sample applications that come with the Android SDKs that you can install? How many of you installed the SDK on your computers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Look for sample applications in there. If you installed it directly from Android's website, you have to explicitly install. If you just simply copied the version that I gave you online, then it is already installed in there. So you can create some of them. I'll show you the API demos in a bit more detail afterwards. There is one more example called the Lunar Lander. This is a simple game that is created with a rocket firing on the screen. You need to land the rocket on the screen. This uses surface view to create that. Very straightforward game to do. And still quite a fun game to play with in practice. Now, in Tween Animation, what exactly is Tween Animation? In Tween Animation, you are changing different properties of a view. Properties like the rotation of a view. You can actually rotate a view and then display it upside down, or rotate it on the side by any degree and so on. You can even make it rotate and come up on the screen. That's what I showed you in the example there. I took the graphic, the image, and then I made it rotate through complete 360 degrees before being displayed on the screen. And then in rotation, I also allowed it to expand from a small size back to its full scale. So I can scale the size of a view from a small size to its normal size. I can even expand it and shrink it a little bit if you want, and things like that can be done. Like, for example, if you want to be able to, remind the user that they have selected a button, when the user touches the button, you can expand the size of the button a little bit to indicate to the user that they have selected a button. That's one more way of providing a nice way of indicating things to it. For example, if you want to just fade in text in a text view object, you can declare something like this in view animation. What are we doing here? This is called as a set, meaning a set is a whole bunch of properties that you manipulate together. In this particular case, I am only manipulating one single property called as alpha. Alpha is the transparency of the item on the screen, and I am changing the alpha from 0 to 1. So that is from completely transparent to completely opaque. So on the screen, it appears as if this text is suddenly appearing on the screen, and it gives a nice touch. And this is the duration that it will take to go from completely transparent to completely opaque. Okay, so by specifying this, you can make the text slowly appear on the screen. So it looks as if it's a nice interface created. So you can declare something like this. Now for animation, if you need to declare XMLs, you store this in the directory called res/anim for view animations, and then you can make use of them in practice like this. So what are we doing here? We are saying animation, fade in, and this is the animation, load animation, and then I am loading in this animation, so I'm inflating this animation from the XML file, and then after that I am applying the animation to this text view. So I get the handle for the text view, and then I apply the animation to the text view. So that's how I make the text view fade in from transparent to fully visible on the screen. Okay, so that is view animation. Let's look at the use of view animation on the screen. Again, going back to this particular example, notice how different animations are actually shown on the screen. Again, watch the screen carefully. It goes a bit fast. So watch the screen a little bit. Notice two things. The two graphics are turning 360 degrees and appearing on the screen, but then the text in between slowly fades in onto the screen. You will see a slight fade-in effect coming in there. Can you see that the text has slowly faded onto the screen? You can also make it disappear if you want. Okay, you can do the fade out just like the fade in also. Again, and then after all the animation is done, I automatically jump to my next activity. Previously, what used to happen? Previously, in the previous examples, you saw that when the welcome screen was displayed, it will stop and say click here to continue, and you have to click on the screen to continue on to this animation. Now here, what I am doing is, after I do the initial animation, I will automatically jump to the next phase. So I can do that by using something called animation listeners, which I will explain in the code. It's not there in the notes, but I will explain in the code. How exactly do I achieve this particular effect in practice? What are the two different animation effects? Two different things. One is this rotation, fading in, rotation and appearing. Okay? And then automatically moving to the next activity. So all these different things are implemented by using this, by modifying this file called welcome.java. That's where we implement the user interface. So the welcome screen, right? Now, why would this be of interest to you? If you're creating an app, you all want to create a welcome screen for your app, because that is the first place to start. In the welcome screen, you display something about your app, you put your names on the app. You all want to see the names of your own names on the screen for a short while, right? 15 minutes of fame. So you use the welcome screen to keep the user busy for a short while, and then you jump into your menu. Okay? Now, there is one more reason why you want to use a welcome screen. If your application needs to load in background data before it becomes ready for the user to use, then the welcome screen is a way of stalling the user. Basically, you are keeping the screen occupied by some woozy bang things going on the screen. And then, when your application is ready with all the data loaded in, then you jump into the menu and then allow the user access to the data. So that's a very common thing that is used in any application that you use in practice. Okay? Any application. Look at any applications that you use on any smartphones. You would see that it doesn't directly jump into the menus. It will always have a welcome screen that will come in, and then it will have something rotating on the screen or some kind of fancy things going on the screen before it jumps into the actual screen. So how do you create that in practice? Now for this, I have created two different kinds of animations. One is the fade-in animation, which I have shown you already. In the fade-in animation, all I am doing is I am changing the transparency of the item from completely transparent to fully opaque in the duration of 5,000 units. This is always measured in milliseconds. Okay, this is 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds. Okay, 5 seconds to 10 seconds is quite okay. You can keep the user busy, and in 10 seconds you can do a lot of background work within your application. In 10 seconds you can go to a server, fetch the data, load in everything that you need for your application, and be ready to let the user start using the application. The other one that you saw was the rotation and manipulation that you saw. What did I do in that? This is a complete set. 3 different properties are being modified within the same animation. 3 consecutive properties are being modified. First, rotation. Okay, I'm rotating from 0 to 360 degrees. The pivot is the point around which I do the rotation. So I'm specifying that I need to do the rotation right at the center of this item. From the center, I rotate it around. So that's the reason why I see the rotation coming in from the center. And then the duration, 2500 milliseconds or 2.5 seconds. Alpha, fading in. This you have already seen. The third part is scaling. Okay? The third part is scaling again. You scale in from the center. You expand it from the center. Okay? If I remove the rotate, then you will see the true effect of the scaling in, because it will slowly, it will look as if it is suddenly expanding out from the center to display the item. Okay? So that's one thing that you can do. 3 different effects being displayed. Now, how do we make use of this within our code? In our code, again, this change is only applied to the welcome.java file. Okay? So what do I do here? So here I am taking the top image, which is the, you see 2 images on my welcome screen, the university's logo and the department's logo. The top image is the university's logo and this one is the department's logo. I am getting the handles to these 2. Then I am creating an animation by taking this particular XML file and then inflating it using this statement. After I inflate it, I am applying that to top image and to the bottom image. Same effect to both top and bottom image. Okay? And then fade in, I am applying to this particular text here. Now, this particular text view. Now, this is one way. Suppose you have a layout. This is the layout, linear layout that you're using within your application. This layout is the layout that you have within your welcome.xml file. Again, lot of things to remember. So this is the linear layout that you're using here. So what I am doing is I am taking this linear layout and then I am consecutively applying that item to all the text views. Other than the first image view, I am applying it to this text view, and this text view. All the 3 of them, and four of them, I am applying this fade-in effect. So how do I access them? I say inner layout is this one, dot get child count. Right? So I is equal to 1 to I++. Every one of the children. Okay? And this one tells me how many children are there in my linear layout. Remember, my layout view hierarchy, I have a view group, and within a view group, I have a whole bunch of views. So I'm accessing each one of them, the different views of the 3 text views, and I'm applying the same animation effect on each one of those text views. So that is how I'm applying the animation. Okay? Again, read the code, modify it a little bit, play around with it, then you will understand what I just explained. Okay? There is no better way than practicing doing it by yourself. Alright? Now, this part is for applying the text view. Now, you notice that after the animation is done, I automatically jump to the next activity. How do I do that? I do that by declaring the animation listener. This is the animation listener. What does this animation listener do? This animation listener is listening to this animation that is going on. This is the fade-in animation that is going on. In this animation, I can say, I can listen for different events in the animation. Starting of that animation, ending of that animation, and several other ones. Okay? Now, so how do I do that? In this particular case, I am only interested in the ending of the animation. So in this animation listener, which I attach to this animation called fade in, okay, I specify saying on animation end. On animation end. That is, when this animation finishes, do this. And what am I doing here? Inside this particular listener, this is one of the methods for the animation listener. Okay? Inside this, I am saying start activity, new intent, welcome.this, new.class. Where did I see this before? This used to be in the on-click listener in the previous examples. I have basically shifted that into the animation listener. So that's why it is automatically jumping after the end of the animation into my menu class. Okay? Straightforward to see. So as you see, I have commented on what I am doing here by putting in this comment. So please do read those comments, and that will guide you through to understand what I am doing in each one of those steps. Okay? And not only that, I am starting this activity. This is an explicit intent. Right? I am issuing an explicit intent. Furthermore, I am destroying my activity. I am destroying the welcome screen activity. I don't need it anymore. Welcome screen's only job is to display something on the start, and then once it is done, it has to go away. So I'm destroying myself at this point by saying welcome.this or finish. I'm done. I don't need it anymore. These two, I don't need it at this moment, but you can use on animation, okay, and then on animation repeat. You can do. These are other methods that are there. If those events occur, you can put in the corresponding code if you want to watch for those events. All right? Straightforward so far? The code now starts making a bit more sense. So when you go to the lab next week, you'll get to play around with this particular example. Now, this example, I have done it completely using view animation. Now, what I'm going to do is, as I told you, there is a third method of doing animation called property animation, which is a more flexible and generic approach that has been designed for use from Android 3.0 onwards. If you are designing an application for pre-3.0 Androids, you should be using view animation. Post 3.0, it's better to use property animation. So what I will do is, I will take the same example and replace this code by using property animation and do exactly the same thing. Exactly the same behavior. And then show you how you can reproduce this behavior using property animation. Code is not that much different. Okay? We'll see that on Friday of this week. Any questions before we disperse? Everybody happy so far? Moment time. Yeah, I throw in a few words in there. Okay, see you on Friday.